Hello everyone. This is the first video of a few that I will be recording to show you how to set up parametric studies using the new Pollination Fly components. For the first one, I'm going to use a very simple example of a box, and we run a series of studies to get the volume to area ratio, and the area. And basically, I'll show you like how to create this data set that can be visualized in DesignExplorer. I will record more videos to run real radiation studies, energy, and daylight later, but this one I'm mainly hoping two audience here. One is long-term, everyone who wants to get started. This is a video for you to watch to learn how to do this. Two, for people who already used the Fly in Ladybug Legacy or Colibri, you can just watch this video and get us started, so you don't have to wait for us to record the rest of the videos. That will take some time before we get there. So with that, this is like a simple example. There is a slider here for inputs, another slider here for outputs, inputs for X. There is another one for Y. And then there is one for Z that is used as a list to create this box. The logic is as simple as it can get, right? A box, volume, area, divide volume by area. And these are the outputs that we want to collect. If you are an impatient person, this is how it will look like by the end of this tutorial. So you can just take a screenshot and stop watching this video. Just click this fly here, and it will work. I'll give you 2 seconds. Okay, now I'll go back to the rest. So the way to basically translate this script like this to something that you can run, set up to run the parametric study. And I will be using parametric studies and sensitivity studies in these videos, kind of like interchangeably. So it's a sensitivity study by nature is parametric, right? You have some input parameters and you want to see how they affect a series of outputs that you want to follow. So there are two components here under Fly, 3 parametric. One is what we call Fly ID, and the other one is the one that calls Fly. So Fly ID, you can think about it as the component that collects all the inputs in a simple workflow. It does more than that when you do like something which you use Pollination Cloud. But for now, it just collects all the inputs. Then you have Fly itself that flies around. This is the one that starts the iteration. So all the inputs that you connect to Fly ID, you just come Fly and say, hey, let them go. So the way they work is just you connect the ID from here to here. And then when you say Fly, it basically iterates all the inputs that's connected to the Fly ID component. Then the other concept is data. So ID is kind of for the inputs, then data are the ones that are generated from the logic. You collect the outputs. To do that, the component is here called user data. This is a component that like we had there for pollination from the start. It has changed, we have improved it, but overall what it can do for you, this one can collect all the outputs, and then you connect it here. And then when you connect it there, like it just collects all the outputs in the process. So this is kind of like how the process looks like. Outputs here connect to this, inputs connect to this. You just say Fly, and then it flies. It generates all the options. Okay, so let me go ahead and connect the inputs here. For the slider, you can just connect it directly. If there is a name here for the slider, it picks up the name. Otherwise, you can right-click here and always rename it, right? For this one, there's Y, you connect Y, the same goes here. For lists, you don't need this list item component. You can just connect a list directly, and again, it picks up the name here. So I'm going to delete this. I'm going to delete this slider. We don't need it anymore. And for these two, you can see they are connected directly and they're fine. But for this one, when it's a list or when it adds a value list, you can use this too, then you can't just connect this directly, right? Because this is a list of items. You want the selected values. That's where this values output is helpful. So you use the list item component or item list item component. You connect the values here, then zoom in, and then by clicking plus, you can get the list values, the first one, second one, and the third one. Every time I use this component, I feel I owe an apology to Andrew Heumann. He showed me this feature, and at the time I told him, I don't see any use for this. It's very useful. I'm sorry, Andrew. So yeah, so now the first one I know is X, the second one is Y, the third one is Z. I only need Z in this case, right? So you can see the value is set to 3.2, which is the value here. The first one is selected by default, right? But just to keep it clean, I'm going to use X and Y this way. So now I can just have a clean way of keeping my inputs here connected to Fly, use the list item component to basically redistribute the values as needed. An automated ID is created here for me, which is the name and the value. And then I'm connecting this ID here to the Fly component. You will see that this ID will become really handy for naming other stuff. So that was the whole inputs, right? If I go here and delete this, if I use Fly here and run it, you will see it says 3 inputs connected. We have 75 iterations. Do you want to continue? And I can say yes, but here it says something interesting. It says to stop Fly, hold down the escape or delete the following file. So wherever the Grasshopper file is, it generates a fly.ing file next to it. Or if you have a folder, it will generate that fly.ing file there for you. You might be thinking, why? Because this is a simple example and everything will work. And now you can see all those iterations are done, 75 of them quickly. For the ones who don't believe me, here you go. So this is with a visual. So it does that, right? But in real life, what you do is usually you put something and the logic is more complicated and you start the run. And as soon as you start, you just see, oh my God, I made a mistake. And then you want to stop and you press escape. And how Grasshopper threads work, it's not usually that successful. That's why this fly.ing file is going to be really helpful, because you can go in that folder, just simply delete it, and then it stops the whole thing. I know you're thinking, no, I'm not that person. I check everything, but believe me, I have done this enough to know like how it works. And Fly component also has this option here that you can run a test Fly. So what a test Fly does, it basically takes 3 random iterations, 3 of the whole thing that you have, and run those 3 for you. So it's always recommended to run the 3 iterations quickly, check the result, check everything, make sure it makes sense before running the whole thing. I know you will not do that. So that's why that the fly.ing is helpful. When you make that mistake, you don't have to crash the whole Rhino and Grasshopper. So that's one thing. That's the starting point. Now let's just collect the outputs too. For outputs, we are going to use this component that I said, this user data. So the way it works is similar to inputs. You just connect the outputs that you want to this output. So I just connect them one by one. You see it just named it volume. The way it noticed volume, because I right click here before I did this and rename this to volume. So it picks the name. So if I didn't have that, let me just use a number component here and connect the area here, or division. So this is the area. So if I connect this second one here, you will see it's called number because this is the name of the component. But if I do area, then you see like this also changed to area. So that's the thing that you want to do. You want to keep it clean. You just right click and rename every single of them. Area here, or V to A. It says all the names should have either letters or underscore. So you can't use white space anymore. So V to A ratio. So I'll do it like this, and now you see that's fixed. So when you name stuff, And then here area, I just connect area. You'll see that you see some OP here. This is because these are outputs. So by default, they're all set to outputs. But there are cases that you might want to use user data to collect inputs. That usually happens when you run a study on cloud, on Pollination, and then you want to bring stuff back and basically collect the results, and you do not have access to the initial inputs in Grasshopper, or it makes more sense to just use the values from the cloud. So that's when you can change it. And what I'm going to show you in this video is like sometimes you use this to collect images or screenshots. So you just change the type to image, which is a special type that you can use. You also have the option to exclude them from recording, which I will show later why it's useful in a different video, not in this one. So now I have this, I have the data, right? I have all the inputs and I have all the outputs. So if I connect this here before running Fly, and let me try it and see if it gives me the error. Okay, it didn't. But we have also a check to make sure you have saved it recently. I think I'm just click on save way too many times. If you don't, it should give you an error to say, oh, you haven't saved the file. Do you want to save it before running the study? So now again says this. I say, okay, yes. And now it runs everything. And now you can see the preview here for the CSV. So you can see there are like that means the inputs are X, Y, Z. Those are the values. There's an out, there's another out, and then area is the third one. So this is the CSV file that they can technically upload to DesignExplorer. Before you had to do something to save. Colibri has a process to help you with that too. But now here what I'm going to do, you can put a folder, and when you put a folder, these values will be written in that folder. So I'm going to do C /ladybug / simple cube example. So now I do this, click Fly, and now you can see the Fly ing will be in C /ladybug / simple cube example. So now when it's done, if I go here, you will see there is a file called data.csv, and it has all the values that I have here, there. So this is basically like now ready. If I remember correctly, where is it? You should be able to upload this to DesignExplorer as CSV. You don't need to upload it somewhere, right? And if you're thinking, yes, we are also developing an app that is similar to DesignExplorer, that's more integrated with Pollination. So, okay, here, get data, browse, thank you, here we go. So we already did this. So it's X, Y, ratio, volume. You can basically filter as you want. So you can see the ones that gives you the highest volume to area ratio are this ones. I mean, because we are changing X and Y, it's not that meaningful or exciting, but again, that's not the goal of this. So you see like the overall workflow is now very straightforward. One thing that I like is like Fly is here on the collector side, not on the part of the inputs. So just Fly there, and then this type is handy that you have, and folder and everything. So we have several right-click options here too. So again, here is 75 simple things, everything runs. But if you run something and you know, like your computer crashes, or I don't know, you run out of memory or hard drive, all of that, now you have the option of creating everything from scratch, but you already have the option to amend basically. So it only adds to, it can add to the existing. So if you have CSV and you run it again, it just adds more at the bottom of that CSV. Or you can add to existing if new. So for this option, it basically checks and sees if you have that record in the CSV. And record means all the combination of all the inputs. So if it's there, it ignores it. If it's not, it will add it. This is really helpful if you run a larger study and something crashes and you don't know where it crashed. So you can basically come and say add to existing. So Fly basically does that check for you. By default, it says confirm if exists, which means if I run this now, it tells me there is one. Do you want to continue? You know, and I can say no. But when I say no, it still showed up. In any case, you get the idea. Okay, so that was the first 15 minutes. In 15 minutes we got here. Okay, with my standards, that's pretty good. So now the next thing that you usually want to do is to also add an image at the screen capture. So we decided for this case, let you use any of the Grasshopper components that you like. Heumann has their own thing. I know there are other plugins have their own. Ladybug also comes with one. I'm going to copy paste this one from here. It's called LB Capture View. Actually, copy pasting might be taking longer, so I just double click here, LB Capture here. So this is the one, LB Capture View. What it does, it takes a file name, a folder, and viewport by default is the active one. You can set the width and heights, and then the mode and capture. So what I'm going to do, one thing to keep in mind is you want to generate the images in the same folder. So it's very important to connect the same folder here to the capture view, so the images will end up in the same folder. For file name, now you see why this is handy. I can just use the ID that is generated, so every file name will be unique, and also it will be in a way that I can understand, you know, like what that file, based on file name, I can see what that image is. Then for width and height, I don't know what was the number that I put here after some testing, 600. I suggest to put a number that makes sense, especially if you're just generating so many images. Don't create a very high resolution image that takes forever to load. That just makes the whole DesignExplorer thing slow. Just make something that is, you know, that's useful. And then the way DesignExplorer is, a square is the best image because it makes a circle around it and all that. And then for capture, I can put a boolean here, toggle, but then you can see how things can get a little bit complicated. So you can put a toggle here and set it to true, and then now you can connect this file as another data that you want to collect. But in this case, you want to make sure you right click here, name, change the name here. So I call this perspective. The other thing that I'm going to do, I right click here and make this an image. Again, this is important because this is a special type. If you, by saying this is an image, DesignExplorer knows that it has to render it instead of just showing it as a value. If you forget this, you will get the path to the image when it loads. So one thing that can happen, and this is just like how Grasshopper works, is if I say fly and this thing starts to run, right? This will change, and as soon as it changes the ID, and once the ID changes, it takes an image. There are ways to just change the order of execution. So for example, you can press Ctrl F for this to come to forward, it's already is, or Ctrl B for this to go to back, so it executes last. But I have found all of that to be tricky. So the way I usually do it is I find one of the outputs, and instead of just connecting a boolean toggle here directly, I'm going to use the output to make this capture to work. For example, I know whatever happens after the logic is done, I get an area, and based on what I have, I know the area is always larger than 0. So I say larger than 0, or just I can connect 0 here. So this gives me a true or false. So if it is larger than 0, then capture the image. So this basically changes the logic that Grasshopper says, I only run this after I execute this, and if this has a value, execute this and execute this. So this just makes sure like your images are in sync for what you want to get. So yeah, here we go. So now if I have this, before running this, I'll make sure my perspective view or my active view looks good. The zoom is good, you know, the styling is good, everything. And then I'm going to come here and press fly. There's an existing one, overwrite it, and yes. And now it runs all the same iterations. You see it takes a little bit longer because it also captures the images, and all the images are now here for all of this. So what you need to do, I'm not going to cover it in this video, but you need to basically upload this folder to somewhere on a Google Drive or what's the name of the other one? OneDrive, Microsoft OneDrive. Then when you come to get data, you can basically load the data from that URL. It should be a public URL. And that's one of the things that we will be addressing with the Pollination version of the DesignExplorer. So you can upload it to a Pollination project. If you have a private one, then because it knows who you are, or you can give certain people access to that project on Pollination so they can only access the UI. But yeah, that when you have that, then everything that you like about DesignExplorer basically works there. Let's see. One other thing to cover is if you right click here, you can also enable fly input. So if you like to have a Boolean toggle, if you like to have a Boolean toggle, make sure you use the LB false start toggle. So when oh, actually it says it's only accept button. Yeah, okay, even better. So that was a problem before, that you will open the file and it just start running because you forgot to close it. But now you can see how that works, right? So click a button if you are interested. So that's something that you can also change. Let me make sure I covered all we talked about the test. I just talked about this enable. We briefly talked about these options here. So that's good to go. And maybe I'll just do this, even though this is not the most practical case. But if you want, at some point you have all these outputs and you just decide, oh, you know, like I don't want the images, I want to have a data set without images, you can right click here, exclude from recording. And now when I let it fly, you see the image is excluded. It's not part of the data CSV. If I remove this, exclude, now it will be included. Here you go. It's back here. Okay, so that was it. Hopefully this will give you enough to get us started with using the new Pollination Fly components. Let us know what you think. We expect people not to ask for so many changes because this is something that we have been using forever. But yeah, I mean, like, you never know. So if you have a good idea, as usual, like, let us know how we can make this easier or faster for you to use. And I will be sharing a link to this Grasshopper sample file. So if you just want to open it and just run it, you can do that. You need to have Pollination Grasshopper or Pollination Rhino installed. Pollination Grasshopper is free, and you can download it from, if you search for Pollination Grasshopper plugin, you can find it. I will also add a link in the description of this video. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video whenever I record it. Take care.